They said any man who married her would die before dawn. The kingdom laughed when the cursed woman became the Alpha King's right hand. But when she gambled everything on one forbidden night, she set in motion a chain of events that would either destroy them both or rewrite the brutal laws of their world forever. Stay until the end to see how intelligence and courage shatter an ancient prophecy. And tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from? The war room stank of blood and wet fur. Alara Vance stood motionless beside the strategy table, her spine rigid as iron, her eyes fixed on the map sprawled before her. Around her, the Alpha King's inner circle shifted and growled, literally. Most of them were half-shifted, caught between human reason and wolf instinct, their eyes gleaming amber in the torchlight. The territorial disputes marked in red across the northern provinces demanded immediate response, but Kyle Draven hadn't moved in 10 minutes. He just stared at the map like he could burn holes through it with his gaze alone. "The Thornridge pack won't negotiate," Alara said, her voice cutting through the thick tension. "They've already killed 2 of our emissaries. If we send a third, we look weak." One of Kyle's generals, a massive brute named Garrett, with a scar splitting his left eyebrow, snorted. "And what would you know about looking weak, Vance? You've never had to fight for territory in your life." Alara didn't blink. "No, I've had to fight for my right to breathe since I was 16. Different battlefield, same principle." The room went silent except for the crackling of torches. Kael finally lifted his eyes from the map. They were dark gray, almost black in the dim light, and completely unreadable. He was a mountain of a man, broad-shouldered, battle-scarred, with the kind of presence that made even seasoned warriors step back without thinking. His dark hair was tied back carelessly, and there was dried blood on his collar from whatever he dealt with before this meeting. "Explain," he said. Just one word. That was all he ever gave her, unless strategy demanded more. Alara stepped closer to the table, ignoring the way Garrett's lip curled. "Thornridge wants us to react with force. They're counting on it. Every pack in the Northern Territories is watching to see if you'll play into their hands. If you send soldiers, you confirm what they already think, that you rule through violence alone." "I do rule through violence," Kael said flatly. "That's how this world works." "Then let me be your alternative." She placed her hand on the map, fingers spanning the disputed territory. "Give me 3 days in Thornridge. No soldiers, no threats. Just me and the facts they can't argue with, trade routes they need, winter supplies they can't get anywhere else, and a very detailed account of what happened to the last pack that tried to carve out independence." Garrett laughed outright. "You want to send the cursed woman into hostile territory? Alone? They'll kill her just for the entertainment." "They might try," Alara said coolly, "but I'm still breathing, aren't I? Despite everyone's best predictions." The curse. Always the curse. It had followed her like a shadow since she was 16, since the night a half-mad seer had grabbed her arm at her father's funeral and screamed the prophecy for everyone to hear: "Any man who takes her as wife will not see the next dawn." At first, no one believed it. Then her first engagement ended when her fiancé died in his sleep 3 days before the wedding. Natural causes, the healers said, but the timing was enough. Her second engagement never made it to the altar because the man broke his neck falling downstairs the morning after signing the marriage contract. After that, no one would touch her. The Vance family name meant nothing when you carried death in your wake. Her younger sister married well and cut all ties. Her mother died of shame, or so the gossip went. And Alara learned to make herself useful in other ways, ways that didn't require anyone to risk their life by standing too close. She studied, learned, memorized every pack alliance, every trade agreement, every whispered grudge that might explode into war. By 23, she knew more about the kingdom's political web than most of Kael's advisors combined. By 25, Kael himself had pulled her into his inner circle, not because he trusted her, he didn't trust anyone, but because she was right more often than she was wrong. And being right kept people alive. Kael studied her now, his expression unchanged. "If you go and they kill you, I lose my best strategist." Not I'd lose you. Not I'd care. Just the practical assessment. Alara had stopped hoping for anything else years ago. "If I go and succeed," she countered, "you gain leverage over every northern pack without losing a single soldier. And if I fail, you still have the moral justification to crush them." A cold smile ghosted across Kael's mouth. "You always calculate your own death into the strategy. I've noticed that." It's a variable like any other. It's fatalistic. It's realistic. They stared at each other across the map. The rest of the room had gone so quiet that Alara could hear the wind howling against the stone walls outside. This far north, winter came early and stayed late, and the castle was built to withstand sieges, not provide comfort. Kael's wolf was close to the surface tonight. She could see it in the way his pupils had dilated slightly, in the tension coiled through his shoulders. He'd probably been in a fight before this meeting. He was always in a fight. That was what it meant to be Alpha King in a world where strength was the only currency that mattered. 3 days, he said finally. You leave at dawn. Garrett goes with you. Alara's stomach dropped, but she kept her face blank. Garrett hates me. Yes, he'll undermine everything I say. Probably. Then why? Because if you die, I want a witness I trust to tell me exactly how it happened. Kael turned away from the table, dismissing her without another glance. And because if you're walking into a trap, I want someone there who'll enjoy killing his way out of it. Garrett grinned, all teeth. I do enjoy that. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to point out that bringing Garrett was almost guaranteed to make things worse, that his reputation for brutality would poison any negotiation before she could open her mouth. But Kael had already moved on, barking orders about supply lines and southern border patrols, and she knew better than to push. She'd gotten what she asked for. Sort of. The meeting dragged on for another 2 hours. Alara contributed where needed, her mind automatically sorting through logistics and contingencies, while another part of her brain, the part she tried very hard to ignore, cataloged every small detail about Kael. The way he rolled his shoulders when he was getting impatient, the slight rasp in his voice that meant he was running on too little sleep, the habit he had of touching the knife at his belt whenever someone said something that annoyed him. She'd been watching him for 5 years now. She knew him better than anyone else in this room, maybe better than he knew himself. And it didn't matter. It couldn't matter, because even if the curse was superstition, even if every death had been coincidence or bad luck, Kael Draven would never look at her as anything more than a useful tool. He didn't do softness, didn't do vulnerability. The last woman he'd shown any interest in had been a visiting Alpha's daughter 3 years ago, and that had ended badly enough that no one spoke about it anymore. Alara had taught herself not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope got you killed in a world like this. When the meeting finally ended, she slipped out before anyone could corner her with questions or complaints. The castle corridors were freezing this time of night, lit only by occasional torches that cast more shadows than light. Her quarters were in the east wing, small, practical, close enough to the war room that Kael could summon her at any hour. She just reached her door when she heard footsteps behind her. Running away already, Vance? She turned. Garrett leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his scarred face split by that same unpleasant grin. Just going to prepare for tomorrow, Alara said evenly. You should do the same. I'm always prepared. He pushed off the wall, taking a step closer. Not threatening exactly, but not friendly either. You really think you can walk into Thornridge and talk your way out of a bloodbath? I think it's worth trying. Because you've got nothing to lose, right? Cursed woman with no future. His grin widened. Must be freeing in a way, knowing you're already dead. Alara felt something cold settle in her chest, but she kept her voice level. Is there a point to this conversation, Garrett? Or are you just trying to rattle me before a dangerous mission? Just wondering. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Why you stay? Why you work yourself half to death for a king who barely acknowledges you exist? You're smart enough to go anywhere, do anything. But you're here, burying yourself in maps and strategy, and for what? For a moment, Alara almost told him the truth. Almost said, because when I'm useful, I'm not disposable. Because this is the only place I've ever mattered, even if it's just as a tool. Because the alternative is admitting that my entire life has been wasted on a curse that may not even be real. Instead, she said, same reason you're here. It's where I'm needed. Garrett snorted. I'm here because I like fighting and Kael pays well. You're here because you're a masochist. Noted. Anything else? He studied her a moment longer, then shrugged. Try not to get us killed tomorrow. I've got plans for next week. He walked away without waiting for a response, his heavy boots echoing down the corridor. Alara let herself into her quarters and locked the door behind her. The room was sparse. A bed, a desk covered in maps and reports, a small fireplace that she rarely bothered to light. She'd lived here for 5 years and it still looked like she might leave tomorrow, maybe because part of her always expected to. She crossed to the desk and pulled out the letter she'd been drafting for the past week. It was addressed to no one in particular, just a collection of thoughts she'd never send, a habit she'd developed years ago when the loneliness got too heavy to carry alone. "They're sending me to Thornridge," she wrote. "Garrett thinks it's a death mission. He might be right. But Kyle approved it, so I'll go. I always go where he sends me. I wonder if he knows that. If he understands that I'd walk into fire if he asked me to. Not because I'm loyal to the crown, but because—" She stopped writing, crumpled the paper, threw it into the cold fireplace. There was no point finishing that sentence. No point admitting, even to herself, that she'd spent 5 years quietly, hopelessly in love with a man who saw her as nothing more than a useful piece on his game board. A man who would never want her even if the curse didn't exist. A man who'd probably laugh if he knew the truth. Alara Vance had survived impossible odds her entire life. She'd outlived prophecies and predictions, built a career from nothing, made herself indispensable in a world that wanted her dead. But she couldn't survive hoping for something she'd never have. So she didn't. She pushed thoughts of Kyle aside, pulled out the Thornridge files, and started preparing for tomorrow. Because that was what she did. That was who she was. The woman who planned for every contingency except her own happiness. The journey to Thornridge took 2 days on horseback, cutting through forests that grew darker and denser the farther north they went. Garrett spent most of the ride either silent or making unhelpful comments about how many ways they could die. Alara ignored him and focused on reviewing everything she knew about the Thornridge pack. They were old, one of the original packs that had claimed territory before Kyle's grandfather united the kingdom through conquest and blood. They'd bent the knee back then, but resentment ran deep. Their current alpha, Marcus Thornridge, was in his 60s and stubborn as stone. He had 3 sons, each more aggressive than the last, and a daughter who reportedly had more political sense than all her brothers combined. That daughter, Senna, was Alara's best chance at finding common ground. They reached Thornridge territory just before sunset on the second day. The pack's main settlement was built into the side of a rocky hillside, a mix of stone buildings and carved-out caves that looked like they'd been there for centuries. Guards watched from elevated positions as Alara and Garrett approached, their expressions somewhere between hostile and curious. One of them, a young woman with a bow, called down. "State your business." "Alara Vance, strategist to King Draven. I'm here to speak with Alpha Marcus. He's not expecting you." "No, but I think he'll want to hear what I have to say." The guard disappeared. 15 minutes later, they were escorted, under heavy watch, into the settlement and toward a large stone building at the center. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and roasted meat. A long table dominated the room, and seated at its head was Marcus Thornridge himself. He was exactly as Alara had imagined, gray-haired, barrel-chested, with eyes that missed nothing. His 3 sons flanked him, all of them radiating the kind of barely leashed aggression that came from too much testosterone and too little sense. And standing slightly behind Marcus, arms crossed, an expression unreadable, was Senna. She was younger than Alara expected, maybe 25, with dark hair braided back and eyes the color of winter storms. "Strategist Vance," Marcus said, his voice gravelly. "You've got nerve showing up here without an invitation." "I have information you need," Alara replied, "and a proposal that benefits both our territories." "We don't need anything from Draven." "Then you won't mind hearing me out before you refuse." One of the sons, the middle one, built like a bear, leaned forward. "We killed your last 2 messengers. What makes you think we won't kill you too?" Garrett's hand moved toward his weapon, but Alara gave him a sharp look that said, "Don't." "Because," she said calmly, "killing messengers is a tactic. It sends a message. But I'm not a messenger. I'm here to negotiate, and if you kill me, all you'll do is confirm that Thornridge is ruled by fear instead of strategy." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Careful, girl. I'm not trying to insult you, Alpha. I'm trying to save us both from a war neither of us can afford." Senna spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but cutting. "Let her speak, Father. We lose nothing by listening." The sons bristled, but Marcus held up a hand. "You've got 1 hour. Use it well. Elara spent the next hour laying out her proposal with surgical precision. She showed them trade route maps, explained how Thornridge's isolation was costing them access to winter supplies from the southern territories, detailed exactly how much they were losing by refusing to coordinate with the crown. She didn't threaten, didn't bluster, just presented facts with the kind of clarity that was hard to argue against. And then she played her final card. 3 years ago, she said, the Blackstone Pact tried to break away from the kingdom. They thought they could sustain themselves through raiding and intimidation. Within 6 months, they were starving. Within a year, they were begging to be readmitted. Kael refused. Blackstone doesn't exist anymore. Marcus's jaw tightened. You threatening us? No. I'm reminding you that independence sounds appealing until you realize how much you depend on the systems you're trying to escape. Elara met his eyes steadily. Thornridge is strong, but strength alone doesn't feed your people through a hard winter. Cooperation does. Silence fell over the room. Then Senna stepped forward. And what does the king want in exchange for this cooperation? Acknowledgement of his authority, trade agreements that benefit both sides, and a promise that Thornridge won't harbor or support any pact that raises arms against the crown. That's it? That's it. The Bearson slammed his fist on the table. We don't bow to Draven. He's a tyrant who rules through fear. He rules through strength, Elara interrupted. There's a difference, and whether you like him or not, he's kept this kingdom from tearing itself apart for 15 years. That's worth something. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at Senna. What do you think? Senna's expression was thoughtful. I think she's right about the trade routes. And I think we'd be fools to start a war we can't win. The sons erupted in protest, but Marcus silenced them with a look. We'll consider your proposal, he said to Elara. You can stay the night. We'll give you our answer in the morning. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Elara nodded. Thank you, Alpha. They were given quarters in one of the smaller buildings, 2 rooms separated by a thin wall. Garrett took the first room, and Elara took the second. She barely slept, too aware of the hostile territory surrounding them, too conscious that this entire gamble might still end with their throats cut. But when morning came, Marcus summoned them again. We'll agree to your terms, he said gruffly, but only if Draven sends someone to negotiate the details in person, someone with actual authority. I can bring that request back to him. No, we want his word face to face. Elara hesitated. Getting Kael to travel to Thornridge would be nearly impossible. He didn't negotiate personally unless absolutely necessary, and he definitely wouldn't do it just because a Northern Pact demanded it. But before she could respond, Senna spoke again. There's one more condition, she said, her eyes sharp. We want assurance that the Crown will honor these agreements long term, which means we want them sealed properly. Sealed how? Elara asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. A marriage alliance, Senna said, between Thornridge and the Crown. Garrett barked out a laugh. Good luck with that. Draven doesn't marry. Then he doesn't get Thornridge's loyalty. Elara's mind raced. This was a disaster. Kael would never agree to a political marriage, especially not to secure one pact's cooperation. But if she walked away now, everything she'd just accomplished would unravel. I'll present your terms to the king, she said carefully, but I can't promise he'll accept. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Marcus stood. You're free to leave. The ride back was tense and silent. Garrett didn't even bother with his usual commentary. He just looked at Elara occasionally like he was trying to figure out whether to be impressed or annoyed that she'd managed to make things more complicated. When they finally reached the castle, Elara went straight to the war room. Kael was there, as she'd expected, reviewing reports with 2 of his commanders. He looked up when she entered. You're alive. Disappointed? Surprised. He dismissed the commanders with a gesture. Report. Elara laid out everything, the negotiation, Marcus's tentative agreement, and the conditions. When she got to the marriage alliance, Kael's expression didn't change at all. No, he said flatly. I figured you'd say that. Then why bring it up? Because Thornridge won't commit without it, and if Thornridge doesn't commit, the other Northern Pacts will see it as weakness. You'll spend the next year putting down rebellions instead of, I said no, Vance. His voice was cold enough to frost the air between them. Elara bit back her frustration. Then what do you want me to tell them? Tell them I don't negotiate under ultimatums. Cale turned back to his maps. If Marcus Thornridge wants loyalty, he can offer it freely or not at all. That's not how politics works. I don't care how politics works. I care about results. And you'll get better results if you're willing to compromise on Alara. He said her name like a warning, like she'd crossed a line she didn't even know existed. I'm not marrying some Northern Alpha's daughter to secure a trade agreement. End of discussion. She stood there for a moment, anger and exhaustion warring in her chest. She'd risked her life to get this deal, had walked into hostile territory with nothing but words and strategy, and now he was throwing it away because he couldn't stomach the idea of a political marriage. Fine, she said quietly. I'll send word to Thornridge that the negotiations are over. She turned to leave, but Kael's voice stopped her. You did good work up there. Alara paused but didn't turn around. Clearly not good enough. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Silence. When she finally looked back, Kael was staring at the maps again, his expression unreadable. Nothing, he said. Dismissed. Alara left before she could say something she'd regret. She spent the rest of the evening in her quarters, drafting the rejection letter to Thornridge and trying to figure out how to salvage anything from this mess. But her mind kept drifting back to that moment in the war room, the way Kael had said her name, the flicker of something in his expression before he shut it down. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't. But for just a second, she'd almost let herself hope. And hope, as always, was the most dangerous thing of all. Then, 3 days later, everything changed. A messenger arrived at dawn with an invitation, a formal summons to the Lunar Court, an annual gathering where pack alphas, nobles, and crown representatives came together under a temporary truce to negotiate, celebrate, and forge alliances. It was politics disguised as festivity, and attendance was mandatory for anyone who wanted to stay relevant. The invitation included a detail that made Alara's stomach drop. This year's gathering would feature a masquerade. Enchanted masks that concealed identity, allowing attendees to interact without the weight of reputation or rank. It was meant to encourage honesty and open dialogue. In practice, it usually just encouraged chaos. Kael summoned her to his office that afternoon. You're attending the Lunar Court. As your strategist? As my representative. I'll be there, but I want you working the room, gathering information, figuring out which packs are plotting against us and which ones might be useful. Understood. He handed her the invitation. Their fingers brushed for half a second, and Alara pulled back like she'd touched fire. If Kael noticed, he didn't show it. The masquerade is the second night, he said. You're expected to participate. I don't see how... It's tradition. Everyone attends. If you don't, people will ask questions. Alara looked at the invitation, her mind already calculating complications. A masquerade meant anonymity. Anonymity meant freedom from the curse's shadow, at least for one night. No one would know who she was. No one would whisper about death and prophecy. For one night, she could just exist. I'll attend, she said quietly. Kael studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he nodded. Good. We leave in 3 days. As Alara left his office, she didn't let herself think about what wearing a mask might mean. Didn't let herself imagine what it might feel like to be seen as just a woman, not a curse or a strategist. She definitely didn't let herself imagine what might happen if Kael saw her that way too, because that was dangerous. And Alara Vance had survived this long by never letting herself be dangerous. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The Lunar Court was held in neutral territory, an ancient estate perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the Blackwater Sea. It had been built centuries ago by a pack that no longer existed, and now it served as a gathering place for wolves who spent the rest of the year trying to kill each other. Alara arrived with Kael's entourage 3 days later, exhausted from the journey and already dreading the politics ahead. The estate was massive, all black stone and tall windows, designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Hundreds of wolves from across the kingdom milled about the grounds. Alphas, betas, strategists, warriors, nobles who had more money than sense. The air hummed with barely controlled aggression and the kind of forced civility that wouldn't last past the second night. Kael disappeared almost immediately into a meeting with the other major alphas, leaving Alara to navigate the social minefield alone. Which was fine. She preferred working alone anyway. She spent the first day doing exactly what Kael had asked, circulating through the crowds, listening to conversations, cataloging alliances and grudges. The Thornridge pack was here, she noticed. Marcus and his sons kept to themselves mostly, but Senna moved through the gathering with practiced ease, charming people who probably should have known better. Their eyes met once across the courtyard. Senna's expression was unreadable, but there was a challenge in her gaze that made Alara's spine straighten. The marriage alliance rejection had been delivered a week ago. Senna hadn't responded, which meant she was either accepting it or planning something worse. Still playing spy for the king, Vance? Alara turned to find a woman she vaguely recognized, one of the Southern Pack's representatives, older, with silver streaking through her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. Just observing, Alara said neutrally. That's what you call it. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Must be exhausting. Always watching, never participating. Do you ever get tired of being his shadow? I'm his strategist, not his shadow. Is there a difference? Before Alara could answer, someone called the woman away. She left with a knowing look that made Alara want to throw something. The day dragged on. By evening, Alara's head was pounding and her patience was threadbare. She retreated to her assigned quarters, a small but comfortable room in the estate's east wing, and tried to organize her notes. But her mind kept drifting to tomorrow night, the masquerade. She'd brought a dress at Kael's insistence. Well, his assistant had brought it, delivered to her room with a note that said only, "Appropriate attire required." It was hanging in the wardrobe now, untouched. Alara hadn't even looked at it properly yet. She forced herself to focus on the intelligence she'd gathered instead. 3 packs were definitely plotting something. Their representatives kept meeting in corners and speaking too quietly. The Thornridge situation was still volatile, and there were rumors of a new alliance forming in the Western Territories that could shift the entire power balance if it solidified. All problems for tomorrow. Tonight, she just needed to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. Alara lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about the fact that Kael was somewhere in this same building, probably not thinking about her at all. When dawn finally came, she gave up on rest and went to find breakfast. The second day of the lunar court was reserved for formal negotiations and political maneuvering. Alara sat in on 3 separate discussions, took notes during Kael's meeting with the Eastern Territories, and somehow managed to avoid Garrett, who was drinking too much and looking for a fight. Kael barely acknowledged her presence. He was in full alpha mode, cold, commanding, utterly focused on the game board in front of him. Alara had seen him like this before, but it still unsettled her. This version of Kael didn't have room for anything soft or uncertain. This version ruled through calculated brutality and didn't apologize for it. When the afternoon sessions finally ended, Alara escaped to her room to prepare for the masquerade. She'd been dreading this moment, but now that it was here, something else stirred beneath the anxiety. Something that felt dangerously close to anticipation. The dress was deep burgundy, simple in design but expensive in fabric. It fit perfectly, which meant someone had taken her measurements without her knowledge. The thought should have annoyed her, but mostly it just made her feel seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly thrilling. The mask came with the invitation, enchanted to conceal identity completely. It was delicate silver filigree that covered the upper half of her face, and the moment she put it on, something shifted. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Not Alara Vance, the cursed strategist. Not the woman who calculated her own death into every plan. Just someone else. Someone who could be anyone. For one night, she could pretend the curse didn't exist. For one night, she could be free. The masquerade was held in the estate's grand ballroom, a cavernous space lit by hundreds of candles that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Music drifted through the air, not the harsh war drums of pack gatherings, but something softer, almost hypnotic. Wolves in elaborate masks moved through the crowd like ghosts, their identities hidden, their usual hierarchies temporarily erased. Alara slipped in through a side entrance, her heart beating faster than it should. No one looked at her twice, no one whispered about curses or death. She was just another masked figure in a sea of anonymity. It was intoxicating. She moved through this crowd slowly, observing out of habit. Even masked, certain people were recognizable by their build or the way they carried themselves. She spotted Marcus Thornridge by his distinctive limp from an old war injury, saw Garrett by the way he moved, aggressive even in a ballroom. And then, her breath caught. Kael stood near the far wall, partially hidden in shadow, watching the room with the same intensity he brought to everything. His mask was black and severe, covering most of his face, but she knew him immediately, knew the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself apart from everyone else, the restless energy that never quite left him even when he was standing still. He was alone. Alara's pulse quickened. She should walk away. Should stick to the shadows and do her job, gather information, make connections, stay invisible. That was safe. That was smart. Instead, she found herself moving toward him. She didn't know what she was going to say. Didn't have a plan beyond the reckless urge to be close to him for once without the weight of their roles crushing down on them both. The mask made her brave, made her foolish. She stopped a few feet away. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." Kael's head turned sharply. His eyes, the only part of his face fully visible, narrowed as he studied her. "Do I know you? Does it matter?" "Usually. Not tonight." Alara tilted her head, surprised by her own boldness. "Tonight everyone's a stranger. Isn't that the point?" Something flickered in his gaze. Suspicion, maybe, or curiosity. "You're either very brave or very stupid, approaching me without knowing who I am." "I know who you are." "Then you're definitely stupid." Alara smiled behind her mask. "Probably, but you haven't walked away yet, so maybe you're curious too." Kael was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching her face, or what he could see of it. She wondered what he saw. Not Alara Vance, that was certain. The enchantment was too strong. He was looking at her the way he never had before, like she was someone worth noticing. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Everything. Nothing." One moment where she wasn't defined by death and duty, but she couldn't say that. "To dance," she said instead. "If you're not too afraid." His eyebrow arched. "Afraid?" "Of whoever I might be under this mask. Could be your worst enemy for all you know." "Could be." Kael pushed off the wall, stepping closer. He was taller than her, broader, and up close the wolf in him was almost tangible. "But if you were planning to kill me, there are easier ways than asking for a dance." "Maybe I'm just confident in my skills." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Maybe you are." He offered his hand. Alara stared at it for half a second, her mind screaming warnings that her heart completely ignored. Then she placed her hand in his. The contact sent electricity up her arm. Kael led her onto the floor where other masked couples moved to the music. His hand settled on her waist, firm and warm, and suddenly Alara couldn't breathe properly. She'd been near him 1,000 times, standing beside him in war rooms, riding beside him on missions, close enough to smell blood and smoke in whatever brutal fight he'd just finished. But she'd never touched him like this, never felt his hand against her body with nothing between them but fabric and intention. They began to move, and Alara realized with distant surprise that Kael could actually dance. Not just competently, but well. He led with the same confidence he brought to everything else, his movements controlled and precise. "You're quiet," he said after a moment. "I'm thinking." "About? Whether this is a mistake? Dancing with me? Being here at all?" Kael's grip tightened slightly on her waist. "You could leave." "I could." She met his eyes. "But I don't want to." Something changed in his expression. The suspicion faded, replaced by something darker and infinitely more dangerous. Want. She could see it flickering behind his carefully controlled exterior, the same want she'd been burying for 5 years, reflected back at her from a man who didn't even know her name. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rougher than before. "No one important." "I don't believe that." "You should." They moved in silence for another minute, the music swelling around them. Alara was hyper-aware of every point of contact, his hand on her waist, her hand in his, the small space between their bodies that felt both too much and not enough. She'd imagined this before, in the dark privacy of her quarters when she let herself be weak, but imagination hadn't prepared her for the reality, for how right it felt, even though it was built on a lie. "You're not from any of the major packs," Kael said suddenly. "Your posture is wrong. You hold yourself like someone trained for strategy, not combat." Alara's heart stuttered. He was reading her even through the mask, piecing her together the way he did with every problem that crossed his path. "Maybe I'm just a good actor." she said. Maybe, but I don't think so. He pulled her slightly closer, his eyes searching hers. There's something familiar about you. I can't place it, but it's there. We've never met. You sound sure. I am. It was technically true. They'd never met like this, as equals, as two people without the weight of crown and curse between them. This version of her, bold and masked and reckless, had never existed before tonight. The music shifted to something slower. Kael didn't let go. If anything, he held her tighter, like he was afraid she might disappear if he loosened his grip. I should tell you, he said quietly, I'm not good at this, at any of this. Dancing? Pretending to be civilized. His jaw tightened. I'm better at violence than conversation, better at strategy than whatever this is. Maybe that's why you need it, Alara heard herself say. A break from being what everyone expects. Kael stared at her like she'd struck him. You don't know what people expect of me. Don't I? You're the Alpha King. You're supposed to be untouchable, unbreakable, always in control, never weak, never uncertain, never human. She paused. Must be exhausting. It's necessary. That doesn't mean it's not exhausting. They'd stopped moving, she realized. We're just standing in the middle of the dance floor, holding each other while the world continued around them. Other couples moved past, oblivious, lost in their own masked fantasies. Why do I feel like you see through me? Kael asked, his voice barely audible above the music. Because I've spent 5 years watching you. Because I know you better than anyone else in this kingdom. Because I love you even though I shouldn't. Maybe because the mask only hides your face, Alara said instead. Not who you are underneath. Kael's thumb moved against her waist, a small unconscious gesture that sent heat flooding through her. Dance with me again. It wasn't a question, wasn't an order either, just a request. Raw and honest in a way Kael never was. Alara nodded, not trusting her voice. They danced for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The world narrowed to just the two of them. The music, the movement, the dangerous intimacy of anonymity. Alara let herself sink into it, into the fantasy that this could be real, that she could be someone he wanted instead of someone he used, that the curse was just a story, and she was just a woman, and he was just a man who looked at her like she mattered. When the song finally ended, Kael didn't immediately let go. He stood there, breathing slightly harder than normal, his eyes locked on hers. I want to know who you are, he said. Alara's throat tightened. That defeats the purpose of the masquerade. I don't care about the purpose. You should. Why? Because if you knew, you'd stop looking at me like that. Because reality would come crashing back and I'd just be your cursed strategist again. Because this moment is all I'll ever have, and I can't let you take it away. Because some mysteries are better unsolved, she said. Kael's hand came up, his fingers brushing the edge of her mask. What if I don't agree? Alara stepped back, breaking contact, her heart hammering. Then I guess we disagree. She turned and walked away before he could stop her, before she could do something truly stupid like tell him the truth. She could feel his eyes on her back, burning through the crowd, but she didn't look back. Couldn't look back. She made it to the terrace before her legs gave out. The night air was cold and sharp, cutting through the haze in her head. Alara gripped the stone railing and tried to remember how to breathe. What had she just done? What had she been thinking, dancing with Kael like that, talking to him like they were equals, letting herself feel things she'd spent years burying? This was exactly the kind of recklessness that got people killed. That was interesting. Alara spun around. Senna Thornridge stood in the doorway, her mask pushed up on her head, her expression amused. I don't know what you're talking about, Alara said. Please, I've been watching the Alpha King for years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he just looked at you. Senna stepped onto the terrace, her movements graceful despite the multiple drinks she'd probably had. Who are you really? Under the mask? No one. Liar. Senna leaned against the railing beside her. You move like nobility, but talk like a warrior. You know who Kael is, but aren't afraid of him. And you walked away from the most powerful man in the kingdom like it cost you nothing. She paused. That's either incredible stupidity or incredible strength. I haven't decided which. Alara said nothing. Senna studied her for a long moment, then smiled. Keep your secrets if you want, but be careful. Men like Cale Draven don't let go of things that intrigue them. And you, whoever you are, definitely intrigued him. She walked back inside, leaving Alara alone with the wind and her spiraling thoughts. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Alara stayed on the terrace for as long as she could, then slipped back to her quarters through the servant passages. She didn't see Kyle again, didn't let herself look for him. When she finally made it to her room, she locked the door and leaned against it, her entire body shaking. One night. One stupid, reckless night, and she'd potentially ruined everything. Because now Kyle would be looking for the woman in the mask, would be asking questions, investigating, trying to solve the mystery of who had danced with him and seen through his armor. And eventually, maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, he would figure it out. And then what? Alara didn't sleep at all that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every word, every dangerous second of contact, the way his hand had felt on her waist, the way he'd looked at her like she was someone worth knowing, the way she'd felt for just a few minutes, like maybe she could have something more than duty and strategy and slow suffocation. Dawn came too soon. The masquerade was over. Real life crashed back in with all its brutal clarity. Alara dressed in her usual practical clothes, braided her hair back severely, and went to find Kyle for their morning briefing. She found him in the study he'd commandeered, surrounded by maps and reports, looking like he hadn't slept either. He glanced up when she entered. His eyes swept over her face, and for one terrible second, Alara thought he knew. Thought he'd somehow seen through the enchantment and recognized her. But then his expression shuddered, professional and distant once more. "Report," he said. Just like that, they were back to normal. Alpha and strategist, king and tool. Alara gave him the intelligence she'd gathered, outlined 3 potential alliance shifts, and recommended surveillance on the Western territories. Kale listened without interrupting, his focus absolute. When she finished, he nodded. "Good work. Anything else?" She should have said no. Should have left and put as much distance as possible between herself and last night's mistake. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Did you enjoy the masquerade?" Kale's eyes sharpened. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. You usually hate those kinds of events." "I do." He paused, something unreadable flickering across his face. "Last night was different." Ilara's chest tightened. "Different how?" "I met someone." 3 words. That's all it took to make her world tilt sideways. "Oh?" She kept her voice neutral through sheer force of will. "Anyone important?" "I don't know yet." Kael's gaze was distant, thoughtful. "But I intend to find out." Alara forced herself to nod calmly, professionally, like her heart wasn't trying to claw its way out of her chest. "I'm sure you will." She turned to leave, desperate to escape before she fell apart completely. "Alara?" She stopped, her hand on the door. He almost never used her first name. "Yes? You're good at reading people. Better than anyone I know." Kale stood, moving to the window. "If you wanted to find someone in a crowd like last night's, someone who didn't want to be found, how would you do it?" Alara's throat closed. This was it. The moment she could tell him the truth, end this torture, let him know that the woman he was searching for was standing right behind him. But fear was a powerful thing. "I'd look for patterns," she heard herself say. "The way someone moves, talks, thinks. Identity can be hidden, but nature is harder to disguise." "Smart." Kale turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "That's why I keep you around." Not because he valued her, not because he trusted her, because she was useful. The reminder was both necessary and gutting. "I'll let you know if I hear anything," Alara said quietly. "Do that." She left before he could see her hands shaking. The next 3 days were torture. Kale questioned half the women at the lunar court, chasing leads that went nowhere. Alara watched from the sidelines, dying a little more each time he described the mysterious woman to someone new. The way she'd moved, the way she'd talked to him like an equal, the way she'd made him feel something he couldn't name. And all the while, Alara played her role perfectly. The loyal strategist, the reliable tool, the woman who felt nothing and wanted nothing except to serve. It was killing her. On the fourth day, a messenger arrived with news that sent the entire gathering into chaos. The Western alliance Ilara had warned about had solidified overnight. 3 major pacts had sworn loyalty to each other, cutting the crown out completely. It was a direct challenge to Kael's authority. War was coming. Real war, not just border skirmishes and political maneuvering. The lunar court dissolved in a flurry of accusations and threats. Kael pulled his people together, already planning their response. His focus shifted entirely to the new crisis. The mysterious woman was forgotten. For now. Ilara should have been relieved. Instead, she felt hollow. They left the next morning, riding hard back toward the capital. Garrett was in a foul mood, muttering about traitors and bloodshed. Kael was silent, his mind clearly working through strategies and contingencies. And Ilara rode beside them, carrying the weight of her secret like stones in her chest. She'd had one night of freedom, one night of being seen as something other than cursed or useful. It had been the best night of her life, and it was going to destroy her, because Kael was still looking for the woman in the mask. And eventually, despite all her precautions, despite all her careful distance, he was going to figure out it was her. And when he did, everything would shatter. The war came faster than anyone expected. 2 weeks after they returned from the lunar court, the Western Alliance struck. Not with armies, that would have been too obvious, but with precision raids on supply routes and border towns. They burned grain stores, poisoned wells, and disappeared into the forest before Kael's forces could respond. It was guerrilla warfare designed to bleed the kingdom slowly, to make Kael look weak and ineffective. It was working. Ilara spent 18-hour days in the war room, plotting responses that always seemed one step behind the enemy's next move. The Western Pacts had clearly been planning this for months, maybe years. They knew the kingdom's weaknesses better than they should have, which meant someone on the inside was feeding them information. Kael grew more volatile with each passing day. She watched him push himself past exhaustion, saw the wolf bleeding through his control more and more often. He snapped at his commanders, second-guessed strategies that would have been sound a month ago, and stopped sleeping entirely as far as she could tell. And he was still looking for the woman from the masquerade. Ilara had caught him twice now, late at night, questioning servants about guests who'd attended the lunar court. He'd sent inquiries to every major pack asking about their female representatives. He was obsessed, and the obsession was fracturing his focus when he needed it most. She should have confessed, should have ended this madness before it consumed them both, but fear kept her silent. Fear and the terrible, selfish hope that maybe, if she could just hold on a little longer, he'd give up the search and things would go back to normal. 3 weeks into the conflict, everything got worse. "We've identified the leak," Garrett announced, slamming a file onto the war table. His face was grim. "You're not going to like it." Kael looked up from the maps, his eyes bloodshot. "Who?" "Lord Brennan, one of your southern advisors. He's been passing intelligence to the Western Alliance for at least 6 months." The temperature in the room dropped. Ilara felt ice crawl down her spine. Brennan was a minor noble, but he had access to sensitive information. If he'd been compromised that long... "Where is he?" Kael's voice was deadly quiet. "Fled. Disappeared 3 days ago. We found coded messages in his quarters." Garrett pushed the file toward Kael. "He knew we were closing in." Kael grabbed the file, scanning the contents with mechanical precision. Then he threw it across the room hard enough to scatter papers everywhere. "How many people died because of him?" His words were clipped, barely controlled. Garrett hesitated. "At least 40 in the border raids. Maybe more." "Find him." Kael's hands were shaking. "I don't care what it takes. Find him and bring him to me alive. I want him to answer for every single death." Already on it. After Garrett left, Ilara carefully gathered the scattered papers. Kael stood at the window, his back rigid, breathing too hard. She could see him fighting for control, fighting the wolf that wanted blood and violence and immediate retribution. "We'll find him," she said quietly. "That doesn't bring back the dead." "No, but it stops more from dying." Kael's laugh was bitter. "You always have an answer, always so rational, so strategic." He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her step back. "Don't you ever just want to break something? To stop thinking and calculating and planning every fucking move?" "Yes. Every single day. Every time I look at you and remember I can't have you, every time I lie about who I am and what I feel. Breaking things doesn't solve problems, Alara said instead. Maybe not, but it feels better than this. He gestured at the maps, the reports, the evidence of their failing strategy. We're losing, Alara. Slowly, but we're losing. And I can't. He stopped, his jaw clenching. I can't fail. Not at this. It's the only thing I know how to do. Her chest ached. She wanted to cross the room, to touch him, to tell him he was more than just a weapon pointed at the kingdom's enemies. But that wasn't her place. Would never be her place. You're not failing, she said. You're adapting. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. He stared at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Then he shook his head and turned back to the window. Get some sleep, Vance. We've got another long day tomorrow. Dismissed. Again. Alara left, her throat tight, her hands clenched into fists. She made it to her quarters, locked the door, and finally let herself feel the weight of everything crushing down on her. The war. The deception. The impossible situation she'd created for herself by dancing with Kael at the masquerade. She was going to break. It was just a matter of when. The answer came 2 days later, in the worst possible way. Alara was in the archives, searching for historical precedents for their current situation, when a courier found her, young, out of breath, clearly terrified. The king wants you in the throne room, now. Her stomach dropped. What happened? Just, please come. It's urgent. The throne room was packed when she arrived. Every major advisor, half the guard, and a crowd of nobles she didn't recognize. They parted as she walked through, and the looks on their faces ranged from curious to hostile to something that looked almost like pity. Kael sat on the throne, his posture rigid, his expression carved from stone. And standing before him, flanked by guards, was a woman Alara had never seen before. She was beautiful, tall, blonde, with the kind of effortless grace that came from good breeding and better genetics. Her dress was expensive, her jewelry understated but clearly valuable, and she was looking at Kael with an expression that made Alara's blood run cold. Triumph. Ah, strategist Vance. Kael's voice was carefully neutral. Perfect timing. I was just about to make an announcement. Alara's instincts screamed danger, but she kept her face blank. Your Majesty. The formal address felt wrong in her mouth. She almost never called him that. This is Lady Vivian Ashcroft, Kael continued, daughter of the late Alpha Ashcroft, representative of one of our oldest and most loyal packs. She's come forward with some very interesting information. Vivian smiled. It was a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. I'm the woman the king has been searching for, the one from the masquerade. The floor tilted. No, that was impossible. Alara had been the one dancing with Kael, had been the one talking to him, challenging him, seeing him. This woman was lying, had to be lying. But Kael was looking at Vivian with something that might have been relief, or recognition, or both. She knew details, Kael said, his eyes finding Alara's across the room, about our conversation that night, things no one else could have known. Because someone told her, because she'd been listening, or spying, or... I apologize for the delay in coming forward, Vivian said, her voice smooth as silk. I wasn't sure it was appropriate given the political climate, but I couldn't bear the thought of the king continuing his search when I was right here all along. Lies. Every word was lies. But Alara couldn't prove it without exposing herself, without admitting that she was the real woman behind the mask. And if she did that, Kael would know. Would know she'd deceived him, played him, let him search for weeks while she stood silent. Would know about the curse, about the prophecy, about every desperate, pathetic feeling she'd been hiding for 5 years. She'd lose everything. How wonderful, Alara heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Congratulations, Your Majesty. I'm sure you're very pleased. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. Lady Vivian will be staying at the castle as my guest while we get to know each other better. The implication was clear. He was considering her as a potential match, maybe even as his queen. The room buzzed with excitement. A royal marriage would be huge news, especially during wartime. It would signal stability, strength, a future beyond the current conflict. Alara thought she might be sick. She made it through the rest of the announcement on autopilot, smiled when expected, nodded at appropriate moments, played the role of the loyal strategist who was happy for her king. Then she excused herself and barely made it to the nearest alcove before her legs gave out. She'd lost him, lost something she'd never actually had, but that didn't make it hurt less. Vivian would marry Kael, would become his queen, would have everything Alara had spent 5 years wanting and denying and burying so deep she'd almost convinced herself it didn't exist. And it was her own fault. She could have spoken up, could have claimed that night for herself. But she'd been too afraid, too convinced that the curse made her unworthy, and now someone else was reaping the reward of her cowardice. "You look like someone just died." Alara looked up. Senna Thornridge stood in the alcove entrance, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," Alara said automatically. "You're a terrible liar." Senna stepped closer, lowering her voice. "That woman is not who she claims to be." Alara's heart stuttered. "What?" "Vivian Ashcroft. I've met her exactly twice, and both times she could barely string together a coherent political thought. Yet somehow she had an in-depth conversation with the Alpha King about strategy and weakness and vulnerability." Senna's eyes were sharp. "I don't believe it for a second." "Then why would she claim—" "Because the Ashcroft pack wants a royal marriage. They've wanted one for years. This is their chance, and they're taking it." Senna paused. "The question is, why aren't you fighting back?" "I don't know what you're talking about. Please, I saw you at the masquerade, saw you leave the ballroom looking like your world had just turned upside down. And I saw the king watching you leave." Senna tilted her head. "You were the one dancing with him, not Vivian." Alara's throat closed. "You can't know that." "I can't prove it, but I know it." Senna's expression softened slightly. "So the real question is, why are you letting someone else steal your moment?" "Because it doesn't matter." The words came out harsh, desperate. "Even if I was the one he danced with, even if I told him the truth right now, nothing would change. I'm cursed, Senna. Any man who marries me dies. So what's the point of fighting for something I can never have?" Senna stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she laughed. "You really believe that, don't you? The curse?" "I've seen it happen, twice." "You've seen coincidences happen twice, maybe 3 times if we're being generous." Senna leaned against the wall. "But curses? Real, actual magical curses that kill men for the crime of loving you? That's superstition, Alara. Powerful superstition, I'll give you that. But still just fear dressed up as fate." Alara wanted to believe her, wanted to think that maybe the prophecy was just words, just the ramblings of a half-mad seer that had taken on weight through repetition and bad luck. But she'd lived with it too long, it had shaped too much of her life. "It doesn't matter what I believe," she said quietly. "Kael's made his choice. Has he? Or has he just chosen the only option presented to him?" Senna pushed off the wall. "You're smarter than this, Alara. You're the best strategist in the kingdom, so strategize. Find a way to expose Vivian's lie without exposing yourself, or find a way to make Kael question his decision. Or, and this is the crazy option, tell him the truth and let him make an informed choice for once." "I can't." "You won't. There's a difference." Senna started to walk away, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I think you'd make a better queen than Vivian ever could. The kingdom needs someone who can think, not just look pretty and produce heirs." She left before Alara could respond. The next week was a special kind of torture. Vivian was everywhere, at meals, at meetings, hanging on Kael's arm like she belonged there. She played her role perfectly, the devoted potential mate who was intelligent enough to seem valuable, but not so intelligent that she threatened his authority. And Kael seemed content with her, or at least resigned to the match. He didn't look happy exactly, but he looked satisfied, like he'd checked an item off a list. Alara avoided them both as much as possible, buried herself in work, in strategy, in anything that didn't require her to watch the man she loved court another woman. But avoidance only worked for so long. 10 days after Vivian's arrival, Kael summoned Alara to his private study. Not the war room, his actual personal space, where he almost never brought anyone. She found him standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the darkening sky. "You wanted to see me?" Alara asked. "Close the door." She did, her pulse quickening. This felt different from their usual meetings. More intimate. More dangerous. "I'm going to marry her," Cale said without preamble. "Vivian, the formal announcement will be made tomorrow." The words hit like a physical blow. Alara had known it was coming, but hearing it stated so baldly still hurt. "Congratulations," she managed. "Don't." Cale turned to face her, his expression hard. "Don't pretend you're happy about this." "I don't know what you mean. You've been avoiding me for 10 days. You can barely look at me when Vivian's around. You think I haven't noticed?" Ilara's hands clenched. "My personal feelings aren't relevant to your political decisions." "Aren't they? You're my closest advisor. You know me better than anyone in this kingdom, and you haven't said one word about this match. Haven't offered congratulations or concerns or any of the analysis you usually drown me in." He stepped closer. "Why?" "Because it's not my place. That's never stopped you before. This is different." "How?" "Because I love you. Because watching you marry someone else is killing me. Because I was the one who danced with you that night, and I've been too much of a coward to tell you." "It just is," Alara said. Kael studied her for a long moment, frustration and something else warring in his expression. "I don't understand you. For 5 years, you've been constant, reliable, always there with the answer I need or the strategy that saves lives. But lately, you're—" He trailed off, searching for words. "Different. Distant. Like you're somewhere else even when you're standing right in front of me. I apologize if my performance has been lacking." "That's not what I—" Kael cut himself off, running a hand through his hair. "Never mind. Forget it. Is there anything else you need from me, Your Majesty?" He flinched at the formal address. "No, you're dismissed." Alara turned to leave, relief and devastation mixing in her chest. "Wait." She stopped, her hand on the door. "The woman from the masquerade," Kael said quietly. "The one Vivian claims to be. When I talked to her that night, she said something that's been bothering me." Alara's blood ran cold. "Oh?" "She said I looked like I'd rather be anywhere else, that I was exhausting myself being what everyone expected." He paused. "Those are the kind of observations you make, Alara, not some noble's daughter who's spent her whole life at court parties." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment where everything came apart. "People can surprise you," she said carefully. "Can they? Or was Vivian lying? Why would she lie about something like that?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Kael crossed to her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. "Because if she is lying, that means someone else was the woman I danced with. Someone who knew me well enough to see through the armor I show everyone else. Someone who challenged me and intrigued me and then vanished like smoke. Maybe she was just good at reading people. Or maybe," Kael said softly, "she was someone I already knew. Someone who's been standing in front of me for years and I've been too blind to see." Alara couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He was so close, looking at her with an intensity that stripped away all her careful defenses. "If that were true," she whispered, "would it change anything?" "I don't know, but I want to find out." And his hand came up, fingers brushing her jaw. The contact sent electricity through her entire body. This was wrong, dangerous. He was engaged to someone else, and she was cursed, and there were 1,000 reasons why this couldn't happen. But when he tilted her face up, when his eyes met hers with heat and question and something that looked terrifyingly like hope, Alara couldn't remember a single one of those reasons. "Tell me I'm wrong," Kael said. "Tell me you weren't the one at the masquerade, and I'll drop this. I'll marry Vivian, and we'll never speak of it again." She should lie, should protect them both from the disaster that would follow the truth. Instead, she said, "You're not wrong." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and explosive. Kyle's eyes widened, something fierce and possessive flashing across his face. "It was you." "Yes. You let me search for weeks. Let me think." He stopped, his grip on her jaw tightening slightly. Not painful, but firm. Grounding. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I'm cursed, Kael. Because any man who marries me dies, and I couldn't—" Her voice broke. "I couldn't risk you, not even for this. That's superstition. It's reality. I've seen it happen. Then we'll find a way around it." His thumb brushed her cheek, and Alara realized with shock that her face was wet. When had she started crying? I don't care about curses or prophecies. I care about... The door slammed open. Vivian stood in the doorway, her face twisted with rage. Behind her, Garrett and two other guards looked somewhere between confused and alarmed. I knew it, Vivian hissed. I knew you were lying, you pathetic little... Enough! Kyle's voice cracked like a whip. He didn't move away from Alara, didn't drop his hand from her face. What are you doing here? Saving you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Vivian's eyes were wild. She's cursed, Kale. Everyone knows it. Any man who marries her dies. Is that what you want? To throw away your life for someone who's been lying to you for weeks? She wasn't lying. She was protecting me. She was protecting herself. She's selfish and dangerous and... She's mine. The words echoed in the sudden silence. Alara's breath stopped. Kale's expression was fierce, possessive, final. I claim Alara Vance as my mate, he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Formally and irrevocably. Witnessed by those present. Horror crashed over Alara like ice water. No, Kyle, you can't. I just did. The curse... I don't care. You'll die. Then I'll die knowing I chose what I wanted instead of what was safe. He finally looked away from her to Vivian. You lied about being at the masquerade. You used information someone fed you to manipulate your way into the castle. The engagement is cancelled, effective immediately. Vivian's face went pale, then red. You're making a mistake. The Ashcroft Pack won't stand for this insult. We'll withdraw our support. We'll join the Western Alliance, and then you'll be my enemy. Kyle's tone was arctic. Choose carefully. Vivian stared at him, clearly trying to decide if he was bluffing. Whatever she saw in his expression made her step back. This isn't over, she said. Yes, it is. Garrett, escort Lady Ashcroft off castle grounds. She's no longer welcome here. Garrett moved forward, clearly relieved to have a simple task after whatever chaos he'd walked into. Vivian shot Alara one last look of pure hatred before she was led away. When the door closed behind them, the silence was deafening. Alara pulled away from Kyle, her entire body shaking. What did you just do? What I should have done weeks ago. You claim me, publicly, in front of witnesses. Her voice was rising, panic clawing up her throat. Do you understand what that means? You're as good as married now, and the curse... There is no curse. You don't know that. Neither do you. Kyle grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. I have spent 15 years ruling through fear and violence. 15 years being what everyone needed me to be instead of what I wanted to be. And then one night, a woman in a mask talked to me like I was human, like I was worth something beyond my ability to intimidate and conquer. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Alara's throat closed. That woman was you, Kale continued. It was always you, standing beside me for 5 years, seeing everything, understanding everything, and never asking for anything in return. You think I don't know what you've sacrificed? What you've given up because of a prophecy that might not even be real? It is real. The men who ikaoisi I atachas died of natural causes, accidents, things that happen to people every day. His grip tightened. But even if the curse is real, even if claiming you means I die at dawn, I'd still choose this. Choose you. Because a life without risk isn't worth living. That's insane. Probably. He smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen from him in weeks. But you make me insane, you always have. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this was doomed, dangerous, destined to end in tragedy. But when Kyle pulled her close, when his forehead rested against hers, and she could feel his heart hammering against her chest, all her arguments died. I'm terrified, she whispered. Good. So am I. His hands moved to frame her face. Be terrified with me. And then he kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined. Rougher, more desperate, tinged with years of denial and want. His mouth moved against hers like he was drowning, and she was air, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her before time ran out. Alara kissed him back with everything she had. 5 years of buried feelings, of quiet desperation, of loving someone she thought she could never have, All of it poured into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kyle pressed his forehead to hers again. Now what? Alara asked. Now we figure out how to survive this. His thumb brushed her lower lip. Together. The Ashcroft pack will retaliate. The other nobles will question your judgment. And the curse, one problem at a time, Alara. That's not a strategy. No. It's faith. He kissed her again, softer this time. In you. In us. In the fact that we're both too stubborn to let fate win without a fight. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through this. But that night, as Alara lay awake in her quarters waiting for dawn, counting down the hours until Kael's claimed mate bond would theoretically kill him, all she could think was that she'd finally gotten everything she wanted. And it was going to cost her everything. Dawn came, and Kael didn't die. Alara had watched the sun rise from her window, her entire body coiled tight with dread, waiting for the scream or the alarm, or the horrible silence that would mean the curse had claimed him. But the castle woke as it always did, servants moving through corridors, guards changing shifts, the normal rhythm of life continuing without interruption. She waited another hour before she let herself believe it. Then another. By midday, when Kael strode into the war room looking tired but very much alive, Alara felt something crack open in her chest. You're staring, Kael said without looking up from the maps. You're breathing. Generally required for effective leadership. He finally met her eyes, and there was something almost amused in his expression. Did you really think I'd die just because I claimed you? Yes. Have a little faith, Vance. But the relief was short-lived. By afternoon, the entire castle knew about Kael's public claim and the expulsion of Vivian Ashcroft. By evening, the political fallout had begun. The Ashcroft pack withdrew their support, exactly as Vivian had threatened. Two smaller packs that had been allied with them followed suit. Letters arrived from half a dozen nobles questioning Kael's judgment, suggesting that personal desire had compromised his ability to lead. And the Western Alliance, sensing weakness, launched 3 more coordinated raids on border territories. Garrett cornered Alara in the hallway outside the war room. This is a disaster. I'm aware. The Ashcrofts are spreading rumors that you bewitched him, that you used dark magic to make him claim you. Of course they are. And people are listening. Garrett's expression was grim. Half the court thinks Kyle's lost his mind. The other half thinks you're a witch who's going to get him killed. Neither option is good for kingdom stability. What do you want me to do about it? Convince him to reverse the claim. Say it was a mistake made in the heat of the moment. Marry Vivian like he was supposed to and salvage what's left of this mess. Alara stared at him. You can't be serious. I'm dead serious. This kingdom is falling apart, and Kael's too focused on you to see it. He sees it perfectly. He's just refusing to sacrifice his own life to politics anymore. His life is politics. Garrett stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, I don't care who he sleeps with or what he feels. But he's the Alpha King. He doesn't get to choose personal happiness over the kingdom's survival. That's not how this works. Maybe it should be. That's naive. That's human. Garrett shook his head. You're going to get him killed. Maybe not by your curse, but by his own stubbornness. And when that happens, when the kingdom tears itself apart because he chose you over duty, I hope you can live with it. He walked away before she could respond. Alara stood in the empty hallway, Garrett's words echoing in her head. He was right about one thing. The kingdom was destabilizing. But he was wrong about the solution. Marrying Vivian wouldn't fix anything. It would just prove that Kael could be manipulated, that lies and political pressure could force his hand. They needed a different strategy. Something bold enough to shift the narrative entirely. She found Kael that night in his private chambers, hunched over correspondence that clearly wasn't going well. He looked up when she entered, something in his expression softening. You should be sleeping, he said. So should you. Sleep is for people who don't have 3 packs rebelling and half their court questioning their sanity. He pushed the letters aside. Come here. Alara crossed to him, and he pulled her down onto his lap with an ease that suggested he'd been thinking about doing it for a while. She should have protested. This was too intimate, too domestic, too dangerous given how fragile everything was. But his arms around her felt like the only solid thing in a world that was crumbling. Garrett thinks I should reverse the claim, she said quietly. Garrett thinks a lot of things. Kale's hand moved to her hair, fingers threading through the braid she'd put it in that morning. What do you think? I think he's not entirely wrong about the political damage. But giving in to blackmail sets a precedent we can't afford. If the nobles think they can force your hand by threatening instability, they'll do it every time they disagree with the decision. Kale's smile was sharp. There's my strategist. I'm serious, Kale. We need to change the conversation entirely. Make this about something bigger than a personal claim or a rejected alliance. What did you have in mind? Elara took a breath, the plan crystallizing in her head even as she spoke. The curse. We use it. How? Everyone's talking about it anyway. About how I'm cursed, how you're going to die, how this claim is going to bring disaster on the kingdom. She shifted to face him properly. What if we prove them wrong in a way they can't dispute? I'm already not dead. Not yet. The prophecy says any man who marries me won't survive the next dawn. You claimed me, which is binding, but it's not technically marriage. Her mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. So we give them what they expect. We make it official, a formal marriage ceremony witnessed by the entire court, and when you survive the following dawn, the curse is broken publicly and undeniably. Kale's eyes narrowed. You want to gamble my life on whether your curse is real? I want to end this forever. No more whispers, no more fear, no more letting superstition control our choices. She grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. You said you'd risk everything. Prove it. This is insane. Yes. If you're wrong, if the curse is real, and it's just been waiting for an actual marriage, I die. I know. And you're willing to take that risk? Elara met his eyes, her heart hammering. I survived the Thornridge negotiation. I survived 5 years in your court being called cursed and dangerous and untouchable. I survived loving you from a distance for so long I forgot what hope felt like. I can survive this too. The question is, can you? Kale stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, low and rough. You're absolutely terrifying, you know that? I've been told. When? Just now, by you. He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. If we do this, if we actually go through with a formal marriage and I survive, every pack in this kingdom will have to acknowledge that the curse was superstition, that you're not dangerous, that I chose you freely and suffered no consequences. Exactly. And if I don't survive, then you were right. A life without risk isn't worth living. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. But I don't think you're going to die, Kael. I think the curse was fear and coincidence and bad luck that took on a life of its own. I think the men who died before had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with fate being cruel and random. You didn't believe that a week ago. A week ago, I hadn't let myself hope. She kissed him softly. Now I have something to fight for. That changes everything. Kale's arms tightened around her. You realize if we announce a formal marriage, every enemy we have will see it as proof I've lost control. The attacks will intensify. Let them. We'll prove we can handle it. The court will fight us. They always fight us. Fair point. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he nodded slowly. All right. We do it your way. But we do it smart. Not some rushed ceremony that looks desperate. A full formal marriage with every traditional element. Make it clear this is a choice, not a panic decision. Agreed. When? 10 days. That gives us time to prepare, to shore up our defenses, and to make sure everyone who matters is watching when I don't die. His smile was fierce. And it gives our enemies time to commit to whatever stupid move they're planning. We'll deal with everything at once. That's ambitious. That's the only way we survive this. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Elara let herself sink into it. Into him, into the impossible gamble they were about to take. The announcement went out the next morning. A formal royal marriage in 10 days, open to all pack representatives and nobles, witnessed and binding under every law the kingdom recognized. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The court erupted in arguments. Half thought Kael was making a catastrophic mistake. The other half thought he was being manipulated. A few, very few, thought it was actually romantic in a reckless, doomed sort of way. The Western Alliance launched 4 simultaneous raids the same day, clearly hoping to capitalize on the chaos. and Vivian Ashcroft sent a letter so venomous that Kyle burned it after reading the first paragraph. She's planning something, Alara said, watching the ashes float up from the fireplace. Undoubtedly, but she'll have to get in line behind everyone else who wants us dead. The next 10 days were brutal. Alara spent 18-hour days coordinating responses to the raids, while simultaneously planning a wedding that had to project strength and certainty. Kyle threw himself into military strategy with renewed focus, as if proving he could handle both personal choice and kingdom leadership simultaneously. They stole moments when they could, late nights in the war room after everyone else had left, early mornings before the castle woke. Brief conversations that felt weighted with everything unsaid, every fear neither of them wanted to voice. "You know we're crazy, right?" Alara said one night, lying on the floor of Kyle's study because they'd both been too exhausted to make it to actual furniture. "I've been told. I mean genuinely, possibly fatally insane." "Probably." Kale's hand found hers in the dark. "But we're committed now. Are you scared?" "Terrified. You?" "More than I've ever been of anything." They lay in silence for a while, hands linked, staring at the ceiling. "If I do die," Kyle said quietly, "Garrett takes over. He's not subtle, but he's loyal, and the kingdom will respect his strength. You'll be provided for. I've already arranged it. You won't be blamed or punished." "Kyle, let me say this." He squeezed her hand. "If the curse is real, if I don't survive the dawn after our wedding, I need you to know it was worth it. These past weeks with you, actually having you, not just watching from a distance, have been worth whatever comes next." Alara's throat closed. Don't talk like you're already gone." "I'm not. I'm just being practical." "You're being fatalistic. That's my job." He laughed softly. "We really are terrible for each other." "The worst." "Want to call it off?" "Not even a little bit." 5 days before the wedding, Senna Thornridge arrived at the castle unannounced. Alara found her in the Great Hall, arguing with guards who were very reasonably trying to figure out why a representative from a pack that hadn't exactly pledged support was demanding an audience with the king's betrothed. "Let her through," Alara said. Senna grinned. "Told you she'd want to see me." They retreated to a private sitting room. Senna looked around approvingly. "Nice, very. I'm about to marry the most powerful man in the kingdom, and maybe die." The decor really captures that energy. "What are you doing here, Senna?" "Bringing you a wedding gift." Senna pulled out a sealed letter. "From my father. He's pledging Thornridge's full support to your marriage. Military alliance, trade agreements, the whole thing." Alara stared at the letter. "Why?" "Because you were right about the Western Alliance, about the trade routes, and the dependence on kingdom infrastructure. We tried to go independent for 3 months and nearly starved." Senna's expression turned serious. "And because my father respects people who take risks for what they believe in. You could have kept quiet, married someone safe, lived a comfortable life somewhere far from all this. Instead, you're betting everything on a curse being fake and a marriage working. That's either incredibly stupid or incredibly brave. Which do you think it is?" "Both, but mostly brave." Senna handed her the letter. "The Thornridge pack stands with you. Whatever happens." Alara's eyes burned. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that she hadn't let herself think about what it would mean to have actual allies, actual support beyond Kyle's claim and her own stubborn refusal to back down. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. You still have to survive the wedding." Senna stood. "But when you do, and you will, you're going to be one hell of a queen." 3 days before the wedding, they caught the spy. It wasn't dramatic or violent. Just Garrett walking into the war room with a young servant who'd been passing information to the Western Alliance for 6 months. "He cracked immediately," Garrett said. "Gave up his contact, his payment structure, everything." Kyle looked at the terrified servant. "Why?" They said if I helped them, they'd protect my family when the kingdom fell. Said you were weak and wouldn't last another year." "And you believed them?" Yes, Your Majesty." "You realize they were using you, that they'd have killed you the moment you stopped being useful." The servant's face crumpled. "I know, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You'll stand trial." but I'll make sure your family is protected regardless of the outcome. They don't deserve to suffer for your choices." After the servant was led away, Elara approached Kael. "That was merciful. That was practical. If I execute everyone who makes a mistake out of fear, I'll run out of subjects." He rubbed his eyes. "Though I'm getting really tired of people assuming I'm about to collapse." "Then let's prove them wrong." The day before the wedding, Vivian made her move. She showed up at the castle gates with 20 armed guards and a formal challenge under kingdom law, the right to contest a royal claim through combat if deception could be proven. "She's alleging you used witchcraft to manipulate my claim," Kael told Elara, "which is absurd, but technically she's within her rights to demand a trial by combat." "Between who?" "Her champion and mine." "Let me guess. You plan to be your own champion." "Obviously." "Absolutely not." Elara grabbed his arm. "That's exactly what she wants. You get injured or killed in combat the day before our wedding, and she wins without the curse ever being tested." "So what do you suggest?" "I fight." Kael stared at her. "You're not a warrior, Elara." "No. But I'm smart enough to pick a champion who can win, and brave enough to stand in the arena while they do it." She met his eyes. "This is my fight, Kael. My reputation she's attacking. Let me defend it." It took another hour of arguing, but Elara eventually won. By law, she could choose a champion to fight in her name while she observed, and she knew exactly who to pick. "You want me to fight for you?" Garrett looked genuinely shocked. "You're the best warrior we have, and you hate Vivian for disrupting kingdom stability." "True on both counts," Garrett studied her. "But if I lose, you're disgraced and the wedding's off. You sure you want to risk that? Are you planning to lose?" "Hell no." "Then I'm sure." The combat trial was held at dawn in the castle's main courtyard. Half the court turned out to watch, along with representatives from every major pack. Vivian stood on one side with her champion, a massive warrior from the Ashcroft pack who looked like he ate smaller wolves for breakfast. Elara stood on the other side with Garrett, who looked calm and faintly amused. "Try not to die," Elara said. "You know, you're much more fun when you're actively defying prophecies and social conventions." Garrett rolled his shoulders. "Don't worry, this'll be quick." It was. Vivian's champion was strong and experienced, but Garrett was faster and angrier. The fight lasted maybe 5 minutes before Garrett had the other man on the ground with a blade at his throat. "Yield," Garrett said. The champion yielded. The crowd erupted in noise, cheers from Kael's supporters, angry muttering from everyone else. Vivian's face was white with rage. "The trial is concluded," Kael announced from his position overlooking the courtyard. "Elara Vance is cleared of all charges. The wedding proceeds as planned." Vivian tried to argue, to demand a different trial, to claim the combat was rigged. But the law was clear. She'd lost. As she was escorted out, again, she passed close enough to Elara to hiss, "This isn't over. When he dies tomorrow, everyone will know you killed him." "If he dies tomorrow," Elara said calmly, "I'll accept whatever consequences come. But he won't. And you'll have to live with being wrong." That night, alone in her quarters for the last time before the wedding, Elara let herself acknowledge the fear she'd been pushing down for weeks. What if she was wrong? What if the curse was real, and tomorrow's dawn would bring exactly what the prophecy promised? What if loving Kael had doomed him? A knock interrupted her spiral. Kael stood in her doorway, looking as exhausted and terrified as she felt. "We're not supposed to see each other before the wedding," Elara said. "That's for normal weddings. This is a political statement wrapped in a curse-breaking ceremony. Traditional rules don't apply." He stepped inside, closing the door. "I couldn't sleep." "Neither could I." "Elara." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "If you want to stop this, if you're having second thoughts, tell me now. We can call it off. I'll make up some excuse, deal with the fallout. I won't force you to go through with this if you're not sure." "I'm terrified," she said honestly. "But I'm sure. Are you?" "More sure than I've been about anything in my life." They stood there for a long moment, just holding on to each other. "No matter what happens tomorrow," Kael said quietly, "I want you to know, these past weeks have been the best of my life. You've made me feel human again, made me remember there's more to existence than duty and violence and maintaining control." "Kael, let me finish. If the curse is real, if I don't survive, I need you to keep going, keep fighting, Become the queen this kingdom needs even without me. Don't ask me to do that. Don't ask me to imagine a world where you're gone. I have to. Because if I die, someone needs to finish what we started. Someone needs to prove that fear and superstition don't get to win. His hands tightened on hers. Promise me. Alora's vision blurred. I promise. But you're going to survive, so it won't matter. Then we're both betting on the same outcome. He pulled her close, kissing her like it might be the last time. See you at the altar, strategist. See you there, Alpha. The wedding dawned clear and cold, the sky that particular blue that felt like a challenge. Alara dressed in white, simple, elegant, designed to project strength rather than romance. Her hair was down for once, falling in waves past her shoulders. No mask this time, no hiding. When she walked into the great hall, every eye turned to her. The room was packed. Nobles, pack representatives, warriors, servants, everyone who wanted to witness either a historic moment or a spectacular disaster. And at the front, standing beside the officiant, was Kael. He wore black and silver, formal and commanding, looking every inch the Alpha King. But when their eyes met across the crowded room, Alara saw past the armor, saw the man who'd danced with her at the masquerade, who'd claimed her in front of witnesses, who'd bet his life on the possibility that they could have something real. She walked toward him, her heart hammering, very aware that everyone was watching for signs of the curse, waiting for something to go wrong. Nothing did. The ceremony itself was traditional, the exchange of vows, the binding of hands, the formal words that made them legally and irrevocably married. Alara spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the fear humming through her veins. Kael's hands were warm and solid in hers, grounding her. When the officiant declared them married, the hall held its breath. Kael kissed her, deep and claiming, and the crowd erupted in noise. Not all of it was celebratory. There were still plenty of people who thought this was a mistake, but it was done. Official, binding. Now they just had to survive until morning. The celebration afterward was tense. People congratulated them with varying degrees of sincerity. The Thornridge delegation made a point of pledging their support publicly. A few other packs followed their lead, clearly hedging their bets. But underneath all of it was the waiting, the knowledge that the real test would come at dawn. Alara and Kael retreated to his chambers, their chambers now, as soon as they could escape. Neither of them spoke much. What was there to say that hadn't already been said? They lay together in the dark, not sleeping, just existing in the space between midnight and morning. Alara listened to Kael's heartbeat, steady and strong, and tried not to think about it stopping. "What time is it?" she whispered. "Almost dawn." Her grip on him tightened. "I'm scared." "I know, me too." They watched the sky lighten through the window, gray giving way to pink, pink bleeding into gold. The sun rose slowly, inevitably, unstoppable. Kael kept breathing. Minutes passed, then an hour. The sun climbed higher, flooding the room with light, and Kael was still warm and solid and alive beside her. "It's dawn," Alara said, her voice breaking. "Kael, it's past dawn." "I noticed." She pulled back to look at him, needing to see proof with her own eyes. He was smiling, actually smiling, and there was something like wonder in his expression. "The curse is broken," he said. "You're alive." "Very much so." Alara started laughing and couldn't stop. Relief and joy and disbelief all crashed over her at once, leaving her breathless and shaking. Kael pulled her close, laughing too, and for a few perfect minutes they just held each other while the impossible became real. A knock on the door interrupted them. "Your Majesties?" Garrett's voice. "The court is assembled. They're waiting to see if the king survived." Kael and Alara exchanged a look. Then, together, they got dressed and walked out to face their kingdom. The great hall was packed again, everyone waiting in tense silence. When Kael walked in with Alara at his side, both of them clearly alive and well, a ripple went through the crowd. "As you can see," Kael announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I survived the dawn. The curse is broken. Alara is my wife and your queen, and anyone who questions that can take it up with me personally." No one took him up on the offer. Over the next few days, the shift was palpable. Packs that had been wavering pledged their support. Nobles who'd been hostile became cautiously respectful. The whispers about curses and witchcraft faded. replaced by grudging acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, Kyle Draven knew what he was doing after all. Elara walked through the castle without people flinching away from her for the first time in a decade. It was disorienting and wonderful and still felt slightly unreal. "You look confused," Senna said, finding her in the library one afternoon. "I am confused. People are actually talking to me like I'm not about to bring disaster on everyone around me. Turns out when you publicly break a curse and become queen, people have to respect you whether they like it or not." Senna grinned. "How does it feel?" "Strange. Good. Terrifying." Elara paused. "Like maybe I actually get to have a future now instead of just surviving day to day." "You deserve it. You both do." But the victory was incomplete. The Western Alliance was still active, the Ashcroft Pact was still hostile, and there were still nobles who thought Kyle had made a catastrophic mistake. And in Alara's experience, partial victories had a way of coming back to haunt you. But for now, for this moment, she let herself believe that maybe they'd actually pulled it off. Maybe they'd beaten fate and superstition and every voice that said they couldn't have this. Maybe hope was finally worth the risk. Hope lasted exactly 3 days before reality came crashing back. The message arrived at dawn. A rider from the western border, his horse half dead from being pushed too hard, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. "They're mobilizing," he gasped out in the war room. "The entire Western Alliance. Not raids this time. Full armies. They're planning a coordinated assault on 3 fronts simultaneously." Kyle's expression went cold and sharp. "When?" 2 weeks. Maybe less. Elara felt ice settle in her stomach. A 3-front war was exactly the scenario she'd warned about months ago, the nightmare contingency that required either overwhelming force or brilliant strategy to survive. They didn't have overwhelming force. "How many?" she asked. "Combined, maybe 15,000. Garrett swore viciously. "We can field 10,000 if we strip every garrison and pull in every reserve. But spreading them across 3 fronts leaves us vulnerable everywhere," Elara finished. Her mind was already racing through options, discarding strategies as fast as she could think of them. "They're banking on us splitting our forces, trying to defend everything and succeeding at nothing." "So we don't split our forces," Kyle said. "We pick one front and hit it with everything we have. Crush them fast enough that the other 2 fronts lose their nerve. That's a gamble. If they don't break, the other 2 armies destroy the territories we leave undefended. Everything's a gamble lately. At least this one plays to our strengths." Elara wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. Their best chance was aggressive, concentrated force. Anything else would bleed them dry in a war of attrition they couldn't win. The next week was chaos. They mobilized every able fighter, called in every favor, and stripped the capital down to skeleton defenses. Kale moved like a man possessed, planning, coordinating, pushing himself and everyone around him past reasonable limits. And through it all, whispers followed Elara through the castle corridors. "The curse isn't broken. It's just waiting. He survived the dawn, but he'll die in battle. You'll see. She's going to get him killed, mark my words." Elara tried to ignore them, tried to focus on strategy and logistics and all the concrete problems she could actually solve. But the doubt crept in anyway, insidious and familiar. What if the curse wasn't about the wedding night specifically? What if it was just delayed, waiting for the worst possible moment to strike? What if she'd condemned Kale after all? "You're spiraling," Kale said, finding her alone in the war room at midnight 5 days before the assault was set to begin. "I'm planning." "You're catastrophizing. There's a difference." He pulled out the chair beside her, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. "Talk to me. What if they're right? What if surviving the wedding was just the curse being creative? What if—" "Elara." He turned her face toward him, forcing eye contact. "The curse is broken. You proved it. We proved it. But what if—" "What? No. No more what-ifs." His grip tightened slightly. "I'm going to war because there's a threat to our kingdom that needs to be dealt with, not because of some prophecy. And I'm going to win because I'm good at violence and you're good at strategy, and together we're damn near unstoppable. That's it. That's the only story that matters." Elara wanted to believe him. But 5 years of living under the curse's shadow had taught her that wanting wasn't enough. "I can't lose you," she whispered. "Not now. Not when I finally have you." "Then come with me." She blinked. "What?" Come with me to the front. You're wasted here anyway. All the important decisions happen in the field during active combat. And if you're there, you can adapt strategy in real time instead of waiting for reports that are already outdated by the time they arrive. Kale, that's insane. Queens don't go to war. Queens who are the best strategic minds in the kingdom do. Besides, we've established that we don't follow traditional rules. He smiled slightly. And selfishly, I want you where I can see you, where I know you're safe. A battlefield is the opposite of safe. Safer than leaving you here to be targeted by nobles who think killing you will break me. His expression went dark. At least 3 separate groups have made threats in the past week. Garrett's intercepted 2 actual assassination attempts. You're not safe in the capital, Alara. You're a target. She hadn't known about the assassination attempts. Kale had clearly been keeping them from her, trying to shield her from more stress. The realization made her chest tight. If I come with you, she said slowly, I'm not just watching from a safe distance. I'm in the command tent, making decisions. Obviously. And if my strategies get people killed, then they get people killed, same as any other commander. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. You've been making life and death decisions for 5 years, Alara. The only difference now is that you'll be there to see the consequences firsthand instead of reading about them in reports. It was brutal honesty, but she appreciated it more than false comfort. Kyle had never lied to her about what their world required. All right, she said, I'll come. Good, because I already told Garrett to prepare an extra horse for you. You manipulative! He kissed her before she could finish the insult, thorough and claiming and unapologetic. When he pulled back, his smile was sharp. I learned from the best strategist in the kingdom. Don't act surprised. They rode out 3 days later with 10,000 fighters, leaving the capital in the hands of trusted commanders and every prayer Alara didn't quite believe in. The army moved fast, pushing hard toward the western front where intelligence suggested the enemy's largest force was gathering. Alara rode near the front with Kyle and his inner command, Garrett, 3 other senior warriors, and a scoutmaster who looked like she'd been fighting wars since before Alara was born. They treated her with wary respect, not quite sure what to make of a queen who rode into battle alongside her king. She didn't care what they thought. She just cared about winning. The enemy was waiting for them at Black Ridge Pass, a narrow valley that was perfect for ambush. Alara spotted the trap immediately. Enemy forces hidden in the hills on both sides, ready to box them in and slaughter them in the confined space. They want us to commit to the pass, she said, spreading maps across a makeshift table in the command tent. But if we do, we're dead. They have the high ground and the numbers in that terrain. So we don't use the pass, Kyle said. We go around. That adds 2 days to our timeline. The other fronts could move in the meantime. Or we force them out of position. Garrett stabbed a finger at the map. Send a fake advance into the pass. Make them commit their ambush. Then hit them from behind while they are exposed. That requires splitting our forces, one of the other commanders objected. Goes against the entire strategy of concentrated strength. Alara studied the map, her mind working through variations and contingencies. There had to be an option they weren't seeing, some way to use the terrain against the enemy instead of letting it be used against them. Then she saw it. What if we make them think we're splitting our forces? She said slowly. We send 1,000 fighters toward the pass at night, loud, visible, obviously preparing for assault. The enemy commits to the ambush. Meanwhile, the rest of our army circles around through the northern woods here. She traced the route. It's rough terrain, but passable for small groups moving quietly. We come at them from the side while they're focused on the decoy force. That's risky, the scoutmaster said. If they spot the main force moving through the woods, we're caught in worse terrain than the pass. True, but if it works, we catch them completely exposed. Alara looked at Kyle. It's your call. Kale studied the map for a long moment. Then he nodded. We do it. Garrett, you lead the decoy force. Make it convincing. I want them absolutely sure we're committing to a frontal assault. The rest of us move through the northern route, starting 2 hours after sunset. Total silence, no torches, scouts ahead to watch for patrols. And if we get caught, someone asked, then we fight our way through, same as any other plan. Kale's smile was sharp. But we won't get caught, because they're going to be too busy congratulating themselves on their clever ambush to notice us coming. They moved that night. Alara rode with the main force, her heart hammering as they picked their way through dense forest in near total darkness. Every snapped twig, every horse's nervous snort felt like it would give them away. But the scouts were good, and luck was with them. They made it through without encountering enemy patrols. By dawn, they were in position. Alara watched from a hillside as Garrett's decoy force made their feint toward the pass below. Right on schedule, the enemy sprang their ambush, hundreds of fighters pouring down from the hills to box in what they thought was Kyle entire army. "Now," Kyle said quietly. The signal went up. 10,000 fighters surged forward from the northern woods, hitting the enemy's flank while they were completely focused on Garrett's decoy. It was brutal and efficient and over faster than Alara expected. The enemy broke within an hour. Their careful ambush turned into a rout as they tried to flee the unexpected assault. Kyle's forces pursued without mercy. By noon, the Western Front's largest army was shattered. Their commanders either dead or captured, their survivors scattered into the wilderness. It was a complete victory. Decisive, crushing, exactly what they'd needed. But as Alara surveyed the battlefield aftermath, the bodies, the blood, the men screaming from wounds that would kill them slowly, she felt the weight of what strategy actually meant. These weren't numbers on a map. They were lives that had ended because of decisions she'd helped make. First time seeing the cost up close? Garrett appeared beside her, looking tired and spattered with blood. "I knew there would be deaths. I planned for acceptable losses. Knowing and seeing are different things." He was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, your strategy saved more lives than it cost. If we'd tried a straight assault through the pass, we'd have lost thousands. This way, we lost maybe 200. That's a win by any measure. Doesn't feel like a win. It never does. But it's still better than the alternative." Kale found her that evening after the wounded had been tended and the dead honored and the army had settled into exhausted celebration. He looked like he'd been through hell, covered in dirt and blood, moving with the careful stiffness of someone hiding injuries. "You're hurt," Alara said immediately. "It's nothing serious. Took a sword to the ribs, but the armor caught most of it." He lowered himself carefully onto the log she was sitting on. "You did good today. That flanking strategy was brilliant. It got people killed. It got fewer people killed than any other option would have. That's all we can ask for in war." He took her hand. "You're allowed to feel the weight of it, Alara. Just don't let it paralyze you. We've still got 2 more fronts to deal with." But they didn't have to deal with them immediately. News of the Western Front's defeat spread fast, carried by survivors fleeing the battlefield. Within 2 days, the other 2 enemy armies had pulled back, their commanders unwilling to commit to an assault when their largest force had been crushed so thoroughly. It wasn't a complete victory. The Western Alliance still existed, still posed a threat, but it was enough. Enough to buy time, to consolidate power, to prove that Kyle and Alara together were a force that couldn't be easily broken. They returned to the capital 3 weeks later, trailing victory and exhaustion in equal measure. The court's reception was complicated. Relief at the military success mixed with discomfort about a queen who'd ridden to war and come back covered in the dust of battle. Alara didn't care. She'd spent too long worrying about what people thought of her. Now she just cared about what worked. But one problem remained unsolved: Vivian Ashcroft and the remnants of her pack's hostility. They'd gone quiet after the wedding, but quiet didn't mean defeated, just waiting for another opportunity. That opportunity came 2 months after the return from war. Alara was in the archives, researching historical precedents for peacetime alliance building, when Senna found her with urgent news. "Vivian's making a move. She's called for a formal council of alphas to dispute your legitimacy as queen." Alara's stomach dropped. "On what grounds?" "She's claiming that because you're not wolf-born, you can't legally hold the position. That your marriage to Kale is valid, but your authority over the pack structure isn't." Senna's expression was grim. "It's a technicality, but it's a real one. The old laws are murky on human consorts holding actual power. I'm not entirely human. My mother's line had wolf blood 3 generations back. Distant enough that it's arguable. And Vivian's good at arguing." Senna paused. "The council meets in 2 weeks. Every major alpha will be there. If they vote against you, Kyle can override it, but it'll cost him political capital and make you look weak." Alara felt old, familiar fear trying to claw its way up her throat. Here it was again, another challenge, another fight to prove she deserved to exist in this world. The curse might be broken, but the battle to be accepted never ended. What do I do? She asked. Fight back, but smartly. Senna leaned against the desk. Vivian's expecting you to rely on Kael's authority or to defend yourself through legal arguments, so don't. Go on offense instead. An idea was forming in Alara's mind. Risky, audacious, possibly insane. Exactly the kind of strategy that had worked so far. What if I challenge her directly? She said slowly. Not in combat, that plays to her strengths, but in front of the council. Make her prove her accusations publicly, and when she can't, turn the entire thing back on her. That's bold. Also possibly suicidal if she has evidence you don't know about. She doesn't. The accusation about legitimacy is all she has, and it's weak. What she's really angry about is losing Kael. Alara's mind was racing now, strategy crystallizing. So I make it about that. Expose her wounded pride as the real motivation. Make the council see that this isn't about law. It's about a rejected woman trying to use legal technicalities for revenge. That could backfire. Makes you look petty. Only if I handle it wrong. But if I handle it right, it makes her look desperate and vindictive while I look like someone defending the integrity of the crown against baseless attacks. Senna smiled slowly. You've learned a lot about wolf politics. I've had good teachers. When Alara told Kael her plan that night, he listened in silence, his expression unreadable. You realize this is exactly the kind of risk that could destroy everything we've built, he said finally. Yes. And you're choosing to do it anyway. Yes. Why? Alara took a breath. Because for my entire adult life, I've let fear dictate my choices. I let the curse control where I went and who I talked to and what I let myself want. I let other people's doubts and prejudices define what I was allowed to be. And I'm done. If I'm going to be queen, really be queen, not just your wife who happens to have a title, then I need to prove I can stand on my own, that I earned this position through something more than just your claim. Kael studied her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. You're terrifying, he said into her hair, and brilliant, and I'm completely in love with you. It was the first time he'd said it outright. The words settled into Alara's chest like warmth spreading through ice. I love you too, she whispered, which is why I need to do this. Not for you, for me. I know. He pulled back enough to look at her. But I'm still going to be there, not interfering, just present, so you know you're not alone. I've never been alone, not since you claimed me. Good answer. The Council of Alphas convened 2 weeks later in the Great Hall, every major pack leader in attendance. The air was thick with tension and barely concealed hostility. This was the Old Guard's chance to push back against the changes Kael and Alara represented. Against a human queen, against a king who'd married for personal reasons instead of political advantage. Against everything that threatened their traditional power structures. Vivian stood before the council, dressed in formal attire, her expression coldly triumphant. I call into question the legitimacy of Alara Vance's position as queen, she announced. While I acknowledge her marriage to King Draven is legal, I dispute her authority over pack law and wolf territories. She is not wolf-born by any meaningful standard, and tradition dictates that the queen must be able to assert dominance within the pack hierarchy. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Several alphas nodded, clearly in agreement. Alara stood calmly at the front of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression neutral. She waited for Vivian to finish her prepared arguments before speaking. Are you done? She asked. Vivian blinked, clearly thrown by the lack of defensiveness. Yes, good, because I have the question for you. Alara's voice was clear and carrying, pitched for the entire hall to hear. Do you genuinely believe I lack the authority to be queen? Or are you just angry that King Draven chose me instead of you? The hall went dead silent. Vivian's face flushed red. This isn't about personal, isn't it? You claimed to be the woman from the masquerade. You fabricated a connection to manipulate your way into a royal marriage. When that failed, you challenged me to combat through a champion. When that failed, you threatened the kingdom with your pack's withdrawal. And now, when all of that has failed, you're hiding behind legal technicalities. Alara stepped forward, her eyes locked on Vivian. You're not concerned about tradition or legitimacy. You're concerned that you lost. How dare you? No, how dare you? Alara's voice sharpened. You've spent months trying to destabilize this kingdom because your pride was wounded. You've cost lives through your alliance with the Western Rebellion. You've wasted the Council's time with frivolous challenges. And now you're asking these alphas to overturn a legitimate claim because you can't accept that you weren't chosen. She speaks out of turn, one of the older alphas objected. She should address the Council with proper deference. I am addressing the Council, Alara cut him off. I'm addressing the question of whether I have the strength to be your queen. And I'm proving it by standing here without apology, without deference to outdated traditions that value wolf blood over competence. You want dominance? I helped plan the strategy that crushed the Western Alliance's largest army. I rode to war alongside your king and came back victorious. I've spent 5 years keeping this kingdom together through intelligence and strategy, while others relied solely on violence and intimidation. She turned to address the full council now, her voice ringing with conviction. I'm not asking for your approval. I already have the only approval that matters, King Draven's, but I'm offering you a choice. You can cling to traditions that no longer serve this kingdom, that value bloodlines over capability, that would exclude anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definitions. Or you can adapt, evolve. Recognize that strength comes in many forms and that this kingdom needs strategic intelligence as much as it needs warrior prowess. The hall was utterly silent. Lady Ashcroft says I can't assert dominance in the pack hierarchy, Alara continued. But dominance isn't just about physical strength. It's about making others recognize your authority, making them understand that challenging you comes with consequences. She looked directly at Vivian. You've challenged me 4 times now, Lady Ashcroft. You've lost every single time. At what point do you think the Council will recognize that as a pattern? One of the younger alphas, someone from the Southern Territories, actually laughed. The sound broke the tension, and suddenly other alphas were shifting, exchanging glances, reconsidering. Marcus Thornridge stood. I call for a vote. All in favor of recognizing Queen Alara's full authority as written in the marriage contract in Crown law. Hands went up across the hall. Not all of them. There were still holdouts, traditionalists who would probably never accept her. But enough. More than enough. The vote passed. Vivian's face went white, then red, her hands clenching into fists. This isn't over. Yes, Cale said, speaking for the first time from his position at the side of the room. It is. You've made your challenge. The Council has voted. If you continue to dispute the outcome, you'll be in violation of pack law and subject to formal sanction. His eyes were cold. Choose your next words very carefully, Lady Ashcroft. Vivian looked around the hall, clearly searching for allies who weren't there anymore. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. The Council dissolved into conversation, alphas debating the precedent this set and what it meant for the kingdom's future. But Alara barely heard any of it. She was too busy trying to process the fact that she'd just won. Actually, genuinely won. Not through Kael's protection, not through luck or circumstance, through her own strength and strategy and refusal to back down. Kael appeared at her side, his expression carefully neutral in front of the watching alphas, but his hand found hers and squeezed. Well done, Your Majesty, he said quietly. Don't. I'm barely holding it together right now. You could have fooled me. You looked completely in control. That's called strategic deception. I learned it from someone who rules through intimidation and violence. His smile was sharp and proud. You're a terrible student. You've far surpassed your teacher. Over the next months, things shifted in ways Alara had stopped letting herself imagine. The Western Alliance fragmented without unified leadership, their member packs gradually seeking separate peace agreements. The Ashcroft pack withdrew from court politics entirely, Vivian disappearing from public life. And slowly, grudgingly, the old guard began to accept that maybe a queen who led through intelligence instead of bloodline wasn't the disaster they'd predicted. Alara settled into her role with growing confidence. She restructured the kingdom's intelligence network, established formal diplomatic channels with neighboring territories, and pushed through reforms that protected smaller packs from exploitation by larger ones. Not everyone loved the changes, but they worked. The kingdom stabilized in ways it hadn't in years, and through it all, she had Kael. Not the distant, untouchable alpha king she'd watched from afar for 5 years, but her partner in every sense that mattered. They fought, often and loudly, usually about strategy or whose turn it was to compromise on political decisions. But they also built something neither of them had thought possible: a relationship based on genuine partnership instead of duty or hierarchy. 6 months after the council vote, Alara was working in her study when Kael appeared in the doorway. "We need to talk," he said. She looked up, recognizing the tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but I need to tell you something." He crossed to her desk, suddenly looking uncertain in a way she rarely saw from him. "The mate bond, the one I claimed you through, it's more than just legal words." "I know. It's a pack bond, recognized by wolf law." "No, I mean it's more than that. For wolves, claiming a mate creates an actual connection. Emotional, sometimes even telepathic if the bond is strong enough." He paused. "I didn't tell you before because I wasn't sure if it would work with you being mostly human. But it did. I can feel you, Alara. Your emotions, your presence. It's faint, but it's there." Alara stared at him, processing this. "Since when?" "Since the wedding. Maybe since I first claimed you publicly, but it got stronger after we formalized it." He looked almost nervous. "I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want you to feel like I was invading your privacy, or can I feel you back? I don't know. It's rare for non-wolves to develop the connection, but given how strong-willed you are, maybe?" Alara closed her eyes, reaching for something she'd always dismissed as imagination. That sense of Kael's presence even when he wasn't in the room. The way she sometimes knew his mood before seeing his face. The odd certainty she'd felt during the war that he was safe even when she had no logical reason to know it. "Oh," she said softly. "I thought that was just... I didn't realize it was real." "You can feel it?" "Yes, I think I've been feeling it for a while and just not understanding what it was." She opened her eyes, meeting his. "Why are you telling me this now?" Kael took her hands, pulling her to her feet. "Because I want you to understand what you actually mean to me. Not just as my queen or my strategist or even my wife. You're my mate in the deepest sense that exists in wolf culture. My other half. And that bond is permanent and unbreakable regardless of what anyone else thinks about it." Alara felt tears prick her eyes. "You're being sentimental. That's my job. I'm being honest. There's a difference." He pulled her close. "I love you, Alara. Not despite the curse or the complications or the fact that you make my life infinitely more complex, but because of who you are. Someone who looks at impossible situations and finds a way through them. Someone who stood in front of a council of hostile alphas and demanded respect instead of asking for permission. Someone who saw me as human when everyone else just saw a weapon." "I love you too," she whispered, "even though you're stubborn and violent and absolutely terrible at delegating responsibility. We're a disaster together. The best kind of disaster." They stood there in her study, holding each other while late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, and Alara let herself feel the full weight of what they'd built. It wasn't perfect. Nothing involving two deeply flawed people navigating a brutal political landscape could be perfect. But it was real. Hard-won and tested and stronger for having survived everything that had tried to break it. The kingdom would keep presenting challenges. There would always be someone who questioned her legitimacy or resented the changes she pushed through or tried to use her past against her. The curse might be broken, but prejudice died slower than prophecies. But for the first time in her life, Alara wasn't facing those challenges alone. Wasn't calculating her own death into every strategy. Wasn't burying hope so deep she forgot what it felt like. She had a partner who saw her as an equal, a position she'd earned through competence rather than bloodline, and a future that belonged to her instead of to fate or fear or the cruel predictions of a half-mad seer from a decade ago. 2 years later, when Alara stood before another council meeting to propose expanding voting rights to smaller packs who'd never had representation, she did it without hesitation. When half the alphas objected and the other half demanded concessions, she negotiated with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was worth. And when Kael backed her publicly, adding the weight of his authority to her proposal, she accepted the support without feeling like she needed it to be legitimate. The vote passed. Not unanimously. Progress never came that easily, but decisively enough to matter. Afterward, as they walked back to their chambers through corridors that had once felt hostile but now just felt like home, Kael said, "You didn't need me in there?" "No," Alara agreed, "but I liked having you there anyway." Good, because you're stuck with me. Promises, promises. He pulled her into an alcove, kissing her thoroughly despite the fact that they were technically in a public corridor and several servants had probably seen them. When he pulled back, his smile was the one he saved just for her, not the Alpha King's cold amusement or the warrior's sharp triumph, but something softer and infinitely more dangerous. "What are you thinking?" Alara asked. "That we've come a long way from you being the cursed woman no one would touch, and me being the king who didn't know how to be human. Is that sentiment from the mighty Alpha King? Call it strategic reflection. I'm learning from my queen." Alara laughed, the sound echoing through the corridor, free and genuine and completely unguarded. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she thought about the girl she'd been at 16 when the prophecy had first marked her as dangerous. Thought about all the years she'd spent making herself small and useful and forgettable, convinced that safety lay in invisibility. That girl would never have believed this could be possible. Would never have imagined standing in a castle as its queen, loved by a king who'd chosen her over politics and tradition and every safe option available. Would never have thought she could be powerful and wanted and necessary in ways that had nothing to do with curses or fear. But then, that girl had also never learned that the most dangerous gambles sometimes paid off in ways that changed everything. "What are you thinking now?" Kyle asked. Alara smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "That I'm glad I danced with you at the masquerade. Just at the masquerade. Well, the other times too, but especially then, when I was brave enough to be reckless. You're still reckless." "True, but now I'm reckless with someone who's just as insane as I am. Best kind of partnership. The only kind worth having." They stood there in the alcove holding each other while the castle moved around them, servants passing by with barely concealed smiles, guards nodding respectfully, the whole machinery of the kingdom continuing its daily rhythm. And Alara thought about fate and prophecy, and all the ways people tried to predict the future, to control it, to make it safe. She'd spent years believing she was cursed, years convinced that wanting more than survival would only bring destruction. And she'd been wrong. Not because the curse was never real. Maybe it had been, in some way she'd never fully understand. But because she'd learned that even real curses could be broken if you were willing to risk everything on the possibility that love and courage and intelligence could rewrite the ending fate had written. The kingdom still had problems. The western territories were still restless. Some nobles still resented her authority, and there would always be someone waiting for her to fail so they could say they'd been right all along. But Alara had learned something crucial in the years since that night at the masquerade. She didn't need everyone to accept her. She just needed to accept herself. To believe she deserved the space she occupied and the power she wielded and the love she'd fought so hard to claim. Everything else would follow. Or it wouldn't. Either way, she'd handle it. Because that was what queens did. What partners did. What people who'd survived the impossible and come out stronger did. They handled it together. "Come on," Kael said, pulling her out of the alcove. "We've got another council session in an hour, and you need to eat something before you try to convince a room full of territorial alphas to accept your infrastructure reforms. They're good reforms. I know, that's why half of them will hate them. Your optimism is inspiring. I learned from the best strategist in the kingdom." They walked through the castle together, matching stride for stride, partners in every way that mattered. And if Alara glanced back once at the corridor they'd left behind, at the path that had brought her from cursed outcast to recognized queen, it was only to acknowledge how far she'd come, not to doubt where she was going, because the future was unwritten now, open and uncertain and full of possibilities that had nothing to do with prophecies or predetermined endings. And Alara Vance, once cursed and always calculating, had learned to be brave enough to face that uncertainty without flinching, to hope without apology, to love without fear, and to rewrite her own fate, one impossible choice at a time.